Hello there, John Gouldthorp here, the life coach of your listener. Welcome to another episode. Thank you for joining me. Today I'm going to be discussing the topic of words having power and how the presence of certain words or certain stimuli in our environment that communicate in some way are assumed to cause certain societal ills or societal evils to be perpetuated. This topic was prompted recently when it was reported in the news that a certain ornithological society was planning to change the names of certain species of bird that referenced particularly destructive or racist or bigoted individuals from history. I'll place a link to this particular article in the description below. I'd like to preface by saying that this video is not political commentary. It's not intended in any way to favour one particular societal, ideological, philosophical, or political viewpoint over another, and it's certainly not intended to excuse or deny the evil that is involved in directing hatred towards any particular person of any particular group. It is, however, an analysis of theories and ideas that pertain to this particular topic and some critical evaluation of it, using some theories and some ideas that are not referenced particularly often and in my evaluation should be referenced more often when explaining this type of subject matter. Now, as per usual, I'll make clear that I'm not a psychologist. If any topics of this video do raise concerns for you, please seek professional help. But by discussing this topic, I'm hoping to exchange ideas and collaboratively learn more with you all. Throughout history, people from a variety of different ideological backgrounds and different groups have made the claim that words have power and that certain words or the presence of certain types of communication or stimuli, whether they be art forms, whether they be statues of particular people on whom people have particular opinions, whether they be books, whether they be films, music, a variety of different stimuli, they've argued that these can cause a particular ideology, viewpoint, or social ill to be perpetuated or strengthened in some way. Now, to state that words have power is absolutely correct. In effect, language is how we think. And language is used every day to persuade, and if you've ever walked into a shop or of any variety or engaged in a business transaction in which somebody has tried to sell you something, then you will be familiar with the idea of words having power. There's no doubt about it. The problem is that we don't discuss often enough how words have power, the actual explanation behind it from a psychological standpoint, and the possible alternative explanations to words having particular power in particular contexts. It has gone and will continue to go well beyond the issue of birds. For example, throughout history, people have posited that certain violent video games, cause people to be violent, that pornography can cause people to be sexually deviant or sexually aggressive, that certain books can instill deviant values on people. There are numerous different claims of causality that people have made from a variety of different ideological standpoints. And one of the most important facts to consider is that often when people make these claims, the solution that they propose is to censor or ban the particular stimuli in question. And this is particularly problematic because if we don't fully understand a possible explanation of how words have power, of how they act on the mind, both individually and within society, then we're not in a particularly good position to propose solutions. So to propose immediately that censorship is the best option is incredibly premature, considering the underlying causal factors don't seem to have been properly examined yet. So today I'm going to propose that we analyse this particular issue using a model that's described in psychology as the information processing model, and it relates to how the brain stores and retrieves information. And I'm going to propose how this is relevant and why it should be prompting us to seek a variety of different solutions to the problems that we perceive. So the information processing model argues that when we absorb information from our environment through our senses, it's stored in the brain in the same way that the nodes on a network exist. If you have a network of devices, including computers and otherwise, often each of those devices can communicate with each other. The information processing model conceptualizes that information that we absorb is stored in the brain much like the nodes on a network, and that the different nodes, figuratively, can affect each other in different ways. And it also proposes that when pieces of information have been associated with each other, normally through our experience, they become closer together and they tend to engage alongside each other more than other pieces of information. Let's take a basic example to illustrate how this works. Argue that a person learns what an apple is. They store in the brain the information associated with the word apple and various other facts related to an apple, for example, its color, its texture, and similar qualities. Let's also argue that this person learns that they don't like apples, perhaps they don't like the taste. According to the information processing model, the node on the network that pertains to the concept of an apple will be closer to the nodes that are related to what the person doesn't like than nodes that are completely unrelated. For example, let's consider the concept of the sky that is stored in the brain. That person, assuming they have made no association between the concept of the sky and they don't have a particularly emotionally charged opinion on the sky, the node for apple and the node for sky are likely to be further away from each other. The node for apple and the node for what the person doesn't like, or other concepts such as bad, negative, etc., are likely to be closer together. And so the model proposes that when that person is stimulated in such a way that the node for apple becomes active, for example, if they see the word apple or if they see an apple itself, the nodes that are closest to it also become active, and that can affect the person's thoughts and unconscious brain activity, and through that the person's behavior. That's the key argument. Now, this is often tested in particular types of experiments in which a person uses a computer and responds to particular words that are displayed on a screen, usually for very brief periods of time, matters of milliseconds. During these types of experiments, a person is asked to push buttons in response to certain words appearing, and the experiments often test how quickly a person is able to push a button when they've seen pairs of related words to pairs of unrelated words. And so by measuring the speed of the different reactions to word pairings, the data are often used to suggest what associations people have between words. So, for example, if a person was able to more quickly push the button in response to the appearance of the words apple and bad than the appearance of the words apple and good, it's inferred from that data that the person has a stronger association between the concept of an apple and the concept of bad or negative. This is relevant because this can possibly explain why words have power. It suggests that when a person is exposed to a particular word or a particular stimulus that has an idea attached to it, it can strengthen the presence of that particular word in the person's mind, depending on the context in which it's seen. So in the matter of birds having names of historical figures that were known to be racist, this model could suggest that if an individual sees the name of a particular bird often enough, even if the purpose of the appearance of that word is simply to refer to the bird itself and not the nature of the actions of its namesake, if that person already has developed in their mind particular associations between a particular type of person, for example, a person with a particular belief system that may be racist in this case, and other concepts, it strengthens the association between those concepts. And so, according to the model, therein lies the danger of that person forming associations between racism and favourable matters that would potentially lead that person to not be as emotionally sensitized to racism when they do see it. And so, let's say, for example, that the person likes birds. If that person were to form a stronger relationship between the concept of racism and something they like, then they're less likely to have negative reactions to racism, and so they're less likely to want to take action against it when they do see it. That's what the model might suggest. Unfortunately, this level of analysis, from what I can tell, doesn't happen often. And this is where we need to also discuss the flaws in these types of theories. Although this model is plausible, it doesn't suggest that people interpret information out of context. Think about how much information we store in our brains. There must be millions of nodes relating to different pieces of information that we've learnt over time. And by extension, there must be an endless number of different associations that people have made between different concepts. What's critical to emphasize at this stage is that correlation does not equal causation. This concept means, basically, that just because two events happen alongside each other, or just because one particular phenomenon or variable changes alongside another in the same way, it doesn't mean that the change in one is causing the change in another. So to refer to an earlier example, if we were to find that individuals who play violent video games tend to be more prone to violence outside of the time in which they play those games, this doesn't inherently mean that the playing of those games is causing them to be more violent. The reason this is so is that the real world has so many different variables and phenomena that act upon us that in all the differences that we have between each other, in all the different situations that we encounter, in all the different psychological attributes that we have, it's simply impossible to specify that one particular variable, in this case whether or not we play violent video games, is the variable that's actually causing us to behave or to function in a particular manner. Now, there is a particular type of research design that is intended to eliminate as many of these other variables, called extraneous variables, as possible, so as to provide stronger evidence of what is causing a particular change that's observed. That is called an experiment. We often use the term experiment in a somewhat casual sense. Experiment technically only refers to a type of scientific research in which one particular variable is modified in a situation and all other variables are held as constant as possible. And because all other variables are held constant and only a particular variable or set of variables is being altered, it provides the strongest evidence that that variable is causing any change to happen if we do observe change. If we take survey research or research in the natural environment, so to speak, for example, if we were to survey individuals who play violent video games and individuals who don't, any difference that we observe amongst those groups can't be attributed to simply one factor, because there are a variety of different errors in the way we collect the participants for the research, and all the different variables which we can't measure or that we may simply not have time to account for in the research that could potentially be not just of themselves causing the differences that we observe, but combining and intersecting to cause that difference. And so from this model and the type of evidence that is often used in discussing these matters, we can't conclude that the mind interprets information out of context. And we can't conclude that exposure to any one word, any one piece of art, or any one variable is going to cause us to act or operate in a certain way. So, for example, in order for the name of a bird to encourage somebody to be racist, we would have to establish multiple facts. One, that whoever is observing this word knows that the name of the bird is after somebody who was racist. They would already have to make positive associations with the concept of racism in and of itself. And they would also have to have the tendency to want to act on any of those associations. Each of these is incredibly important to understand in the field of psychology if we want to understand people's functioning in depth. There's no evidence from these models that suggests that exposure to just a particular stimulus in and of itself is sufficient to actually cause or perpetuate a particular phenomenon in society, such as racism. It's similar when, in the past, it was argued that, for example, certain types of music could cause people to behave in certain ways. or that, for example, viewing pornography could teach people to behave in sexually deviant or sexually aggressive manners. The mind does not interpret the information that it absorbs from these stimuli out of context. If, for example, after hearing particular music, a person shows more symptoms of mental illness or becomes more aggressive or intensifies on a particularly undesirable dimension, we can't conclude that it was the music itself that caused that, because there are numerous other variables that could be acting on the individual, and indeed it's even possible that the individual already had those was already experiencing those phenomena and simply sought music that reinforced their feelings, which is a different type of psychological tendency in and of itself. It's simply not possible for these models to posit that the mind exists in a vacuum and only interprets information in and of itself without reference to any other factor, without reference to existing information. Now, if we do decide to use this model to argue that these types of stimuli can potentially cause us to develop unwanted associations between particular social ills and acceptability, we could also argue by the same model that we could use the same psychological tendencies to help people develop the more desirable types of association. For example, if we were to expose people to racist stimuli but then teach them to associate it with ideas that were repulsive to them, then according to this model, we could teach them to be repulsed by racism, which, assuming that led to a more harmonious, peaceful, and less hateful society, would in itself be desirable. Another issue to consider, which is extremely important from the standpoint of psychological health and also from the standpoint of the functioning of society, is that avoidance is not a good psychological strategy. It's not psychologically healthy when it comes to trying to reduce particular social ills such as bigotry. Often our immediate assumption is that simply censoring the stimuli that refer to it will lessen the problem. I can emphatically state that this is not the case. If we do not become aware of something, we can't learn about it. Often we say that in order to eliminate bigotry, we need to be educated. Bigotry is an objectively bad phenomenon, but unless we learn about why it occurs and how it occurs and its different forms and the different ways that it has occurred throughout history and what the effects are, we'll never be able to properly counteract it. Simply censoring it is not going to be of any good. If you hide people from reality, then they're never going to be able to learn to cope with it. And I can attest, as someone who's worked in the mental health industry and now as a life coach, that the goal that I share with my clients is for them to eventually be able to face and answer the difficult questions, the questions that may be uncomfortable to face and uncomfortable to answer, but that nonetheless hold the most valuable lessons for them. In fact, in the realm of the treatment of mental illness, when treating certain forms of anxiety or phobias, often clinicians will use a type of therapy called exposure therapy that involves having an individual place themselves in the presence of what makes them anxious or what frightens them, and using strategies to become accustomed to its presence so that over time they become less affected by it. In order to counteract anything we don't like, we have to learn why it's bad, why it is that we don't like it, and we have to specifically learn what it is that we're going to change in order to counteract it. If you hide particular stimuli from people, not only will they not know how bad they are and that they should be counteracting them, it may also have the opposite effect, and it may encourage people to want to pursue the forbidden fruit, so to speak. People sometimes want what they've been told they can't have, and according to what's been argued, it would be counterproductive to simply deny something of someone only to have them pursue it later. Instead, it would be much better to use theories like the information processing model to show people the evil that exists in the world and then show them why they should be repulsed by it, and then teach them how to respond to it when they do see it. I'll say as much as anyone that I do wish we lived in a perfect world in which these evils didn't exist. But since evil does exist, if we simply run from it, we won't be taking any action to combat it. We must be able to face what we don't like so that we can learn what to do with it. The alternative situation to consider is when the particular stimulus that we're considering, for example, particular types of books or particular types of art that don't inherently have any types of connotations, are said to have those connotations and then are said to be the cause of particular evils. If we don't think critically about why we believe these facts to be true, why we believe that those books are causing people to have certain thoughts or behave in certain ways, if we don't think about that and we simply assume that our opinions on them are true, we're potentially setting a precedent that the opinion of a particular group or a particular individual should always be considered to be correct and to be an appropriate grounds on which to exercise that type of authority. I've discussed in a previous episode why our opinions can often be inaccurate, but for the time being, suffice it to say that this is a dangerous precedent to be setting. So thank you for joining me for today's episode. I would very much welcome commentary from all my listeners. Please feel free to comment below or write to me. And until next time, take care.